I was only 16 when I did my leaving certificate. And one night I read the newspaper and it said that the Australian Air Force, Royal Australian Air Force, were looking for young men to join and become pilots because of the Korean War. So I was lucky enough to be caught up in that.
I liked the Army. I loved it from the moment that I joined it. It was my personal university. In those days, they were recruiting for Korea, and if you went out there to the recruiting office in Addison Road, Marrickville, for 2 days you had meals and what have you. And the next day I thought, oh, Korea, yeah, it'd be exciting to fight over there, so I'm going to join up.
It was very important to me. Actually going into service in the first place was important because I was influenced by the experience of my father and 2 uncles. And then, of course, when the Korean War came along, I joined the Navy at the age of 17, and that was exciting.
The Korean War erupted on the 25th of June 1950 when North Korea invaded the South. The war had been building for some time and it played out very, very clearly on the Korean peninsula, where that long, slender peninsula was divided between a communist north and the pro-west south along the 38th parallel.
My first question was, Sergeant, where's Korea? I had no idea. I had no idea of the politics. I was just an 18-year-old kid, put my age up 4 years to get in the Army.
There was not a lot of news about Korea, and so we arrived there from a very hot summer in Australia to a blisteringly cold winter in Korea.
And I remember standing on the truck and you could look over the entire city of Busan and it was all flattened. There was no buildings. They'd literally been flattened. It was a real mess. And as we were getting towards the front, you could hear the artillery, you could hear the sounds of the artillery. And I was getting a bit apprehensive and I thought, well, hang on. No one asked me to join.
The amount of overall flight time that we had when we arrived was probably less than most aero club pilots have these days. When we arrived, we did 2 area reconnaissance flights, one west and one east, and an experienced pilot took us over the Han River into North Korea, and then after that we were deemed to be fully operational.
We went round to Sasebo to take on our naval duties, and these were largely patrolling near the 38th parallel on the west coast of Korea to make sure that the Chinese weren't feeding supplies across. As a midshipman, we were moved around to different positions. Initially, I kept watch to identify any potential attack on our ship.
When we arrived, they said, have you a particular company that you want to join? They asked us, and I said, yes, I want to join my friend Sydney, and he's in Don Company. And the guy said, oh. He was killed 3 days before that. So that was not just my best friend, he was really my only friend in the Army. So that shook me up a little bit. So then it was normal patrolling back in the line. We went to Area 159, and that was my introduction to the Korean War. But then they sent me off to the intelligence section because we had to do all their maps and everything to do with air photographs.
So we then became more involved. We went up to Chongjin, very close to the Russian border. We were bombarding there to destroy the port and the rail facilities, to disrupt supplies. It was only after the Chinese came into the war that the real horrors became realized. The land leaders were identifying different uniforms on people, and it had been an enormous onslaught from China. The American commander asked our captain to go up to a place called Chinampo on the Taedong River in North Korea to cover what was expected to be the evacuation of the US 8th Army. And as we arrived off there and the evacuation was starting, the winter set in and the snow came, and that was when we really came to appreciate the horrors of the Korean winter. And I should mention that when the spray came over the bow and hit the superstructure of the ship, it froze.
Our arrival in Korea in the middle of winter was to live in tents. The heating arrangement was an oil heater in the middle of the room, so you'd light the heater up and get that going pretty hot, and it was 6 to a tent.
As a midshipman, I didn't have a cabin, I just had a camp bed in a passageway, and that was pretty hazardous.
Well, you could be on a reconnaissance patrol, which was only a few people, just really finding out the lay of the land. You could also be on a listening outpost where there's only two of you placed out, and in some places just listening for the enemy. Or you could be a fighting patrol, which could be from 12, 15, 16 men. And there was a 10-mile demarcation, and there was no civilians, and anybody in that area was the enemy, apart from the UN troops. So our job was then to spread out in an extended line, and if you met anybody, engage with them and shoot them, or they shoot you, whatever.
Our hours of work, we would have a dawn patrol, which in the winter time was pretty brutal. We were doing interdiction work, that is keeping the supply trucks off the road. So early in the morning you'd take off in the dark and get up into North Korea as the sun rose, hoping to catch a few who were a little bit late getting into their hidey holes. They'd allocate you an aeroplane. You would be given a position, either 1, 2, 3 or 4, depending on your experience, and the air traffic controllers would give you taxi clearance to go out to what was a single runway, and it was a very busy runway. The Meteor was really quite a short-ranged aeroplane, and our missions very rarely exceeded an hour, and you were very focused. Particularly when you were looking in your gun sight, your world became the grid that you were keeping on the target. We used to come down fairly low, and one of the problems was that we were attacking into terrain that we knew very little about, and of course it was not suitable for flying against high-speed supersonic swept-wing aeroplanes. It wasn't a good aeroplane at high altitude, and as a result quite a few 77 squadron pilots were shot down by MiGs. A friend of mine spent 2 years in prisoner of war camp.
The San Juan Valley was quite a wide valley, and the Hook had overlooked the entire valley, so it was really a tactical position. Certainly in the Hook area, you had the smell of death day and night, depending on the winds. So there was something like 2,000 enemy dead. I think we lost about 58.
We were all very young. In my group, I think we're all 21. And I don't think we had deep and meaningful thoughts about what we were doing. We had very little contact with the Korean people themselves. I think I went into Seoul one day just to have a look and see what it was like, but that was only on one occasion.
You know, you're doing a job. We didn't mix with the British, we didn't mix with the Americans, we didn't mix with the Koreans, not that we didn't want to mix with them, you don't have the time, you're doing your job. So many things that happened in the Korean War that was really nasty. But when I returned to Korea 15 years ago, it was like going into a garden. I can remember on the bus, I looked at the mountains, and the mountains are green, all these beautiful trees, the gardens, and to see South Korea and see the change. It was, talk about miracles.